The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com website and learn more about how we can support your business or nonprofit. Have you ever wondered why a company would do something so stupid that would cost their brand reputation hundreds of thousands of dollars and some of their best employees? Each week, management and HR consultants John Tolheimer and Chuck Smikian dive into the stories that matter and discuss the lessons and what we should do to protect our organizations and businesses. Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. On this week's episode, John and Chuck talk about violence in the workplace and how we can prevent it. But first, here's what's happening in the human resources news. So Chuck, what's going on over there in Orlando, Florida?
Well, in Orlando, Florida, it's beautiful weather. It's now going into April. We need some rain, but it's like, what's the weather? What's the HR forecast? What's going on in the country? What's going on? Yes, beyond Florida. I will tell you that for me, last week, I spoke at a group of hospitality HR professionals, also hospitality finance and technology professionals, about a subject that you and I use in many of our classes called trust.
Wow.
And how to build trust through systems and habits. And it was well received, John. I had a great time. Yeah, I had a great time. And I know you and I we can do keynote speeches like that. We can MC different events, but this was a little off topic on HR, but it was still how to build trust as an HR professional for our folks. So that was good.
How is trust off topic for somebody in human resources? Like, isn't that fundamentally, as human resources? I mean, anything you do in a business, that's critical. On April 18th, I'm doing a coworker, how to be the best coworker you can class. And trust is going to be one of the topics. So I think for everybody, right? Trust is an important topic.
Yeah, it is. And I tell the folks, if you're in HR and you have to have trust of your team, if you lose trust or break that trust, it's going to be an extremely difficult road for you. But that's what I've been up to in Orlando, Florida. What about you?
That's great. Yeah, no, I did a lot of classes this week. I did the Essentials of HR Law class, and I did a class for people that are just getting into HR. And I will tell you, my class yesterday was one of the best classes I had because they were asking really insightful, like, how do I deal with this? Or I did it this way. What do you think? Is that going to get me in trouble? I want to come to you, and I have one of the stories that was presented yesterday was there was a employee at the workplace that had a bad bodily odor situation. And so the managers talked to this person. In fact, the person that I was communicating with said, I think all the managers talked to this person, in fact, had to suspend this person one day. Well, the employee has now said out loud that they feel they're being harassed and they're going to get a lawyer. And so this person was like, do they have a case? Is there a case or not? So what do you think? Like, how would you deal with that concern?
Yeah, well, I have dealt with that at least twice in my career. And, what are they being harassed about? The first thing I look at is it legal or illegal, right? If they said, well, I have a disability, I have this situation, right? That takes it, doesn't mean it's okay that you have to, we just have to live with it. We don't want to talk about it because they said disability. We're just going to let them. No, then you would take it through that interactive process, and go down through for, is it a disability? What accommodations, would it be reasonable? Is there a doctor's note? All that great stuff. that aside, John, when it comes
Yeah.
to dealing with an employee that has something like you said, maybe body odor, I've dealt with someone that had bad breath. I mean, it was really bad to the point that no one wanted to meet with this manager. No one wanted to talk to this manager. No one wanted him to talk in meetings. It was that bad. So I pulled him aside and I said, listen, I got to tell you something. You're probably going to be a little uncomfortable talking, and I said it, your breath smells really bad, and it's not an occasional thing. There's another situation, and you may want to get that checked out. I said, and he was like, no one's ever said this. I don't know. And I'm thinking to myself, your wife never said this? I mean, because she never kissed you? I don't know, but that's aside. So long story short, it turned out he actually had, a couple weeks later, he followed up. He actually had a medical condition. And he said, if I had not said that to him, he would not have known that. And from that point on, he didn't have stinky bad breath. But it was a really bad sour smell.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect example. And that was the conversation we had. The first one, because I kind of threw it out to the class because I love getting people's opinions. And the first thing people said is, what's your personal grooming policy? Was that in there? And so one of our recommendations was go back and make sure you do have a grooming policy and what your standard is and that kind of stuff, because it's hard to enforce it if you don't have it. And so that was the first. The second thing was the ADA we talked about, and making sure, is it a ADA situation, right? Is it a medical? And then you have to go through, as you said, the interactive process. But you're right. Those conversations can be difficult. It sounds like the managers were doing the conversations, but this person felt harassed, right? And so again, so I think doing those things will stop that harassment. Bodily odor is not a protected class, right? And so I think that was it. So again, I love having those conversations because I think they add the richness to our classes. When people come like, hey, I'm dealing with this and I have to do this. So I love it. 100% kind of get into all those kind of things in there. What else is going on? I know you've been working with some clients. You've been doing some work. What's the big thing?
Yeah, I've been working on handbooks, been doing a lot of sexual harassment classes. And folks, I want to tell you, if you have 15 or more employees, 20 employees, 30, do your sexual harassment avoidance class. And half the companies that I work with, the reason they've decided to do a sexual harassment, respectful workplace class is because they already had a situation, an EEO complaint, a court case, something they had to settle, something that became a bigger deal than it needed to be. And when it comes to these sexual harassment situations, there's only a few pivot points, right? A, the employees didn't know how to treat each other. B, the managers didn't know how to treat the employees when it came to the types of sexual harassment, the things they can and can't say. Or C, when it was brought to a manager's attention, the manager didn't know what to do, or the company didn't know what to do, or they completely ignored it. Those are the three things that are going to get you in hot water. And unless you start doing your training yourself, training your people, you're going to be constantly running behind. And better call Saul, shall we say, better call Chuck, because, oh my gosh, we need to do these classes and we need to do them now. So that's what I've been working on a lot of.
I love that you're doing those. And I love that thought of let's do them now before the issue comes up. And a lot of times we're working with these organizations. They're like, well, why do we do it? There's never an issue. Everyone's fine. It only takes one person to do it. And then all of a sudden now you're in court or you're getting an EEOC complaint or you're like, oh gosh, something's coming up. And it's better just to prevent it, right? Preventative medicine is such a great thing to do that. And I know, Chuck, you've been doing sexual harassment training for a long time, and you're so good at getting it across 90 minutes, getting it across. Everyone walks away going, all right, I got it. And then coming back a year later, redoing it, reinforcing it. It's just a great pattern there. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. So, but that's what I've been working on a lot. There's a
Right.
couple of neat HR stories that I think out in the news right now, but interesting enough, just real briefly, and I know you got a few things, and you've got a great story today, very emotional story, shall we say. But we do criminal background checks. A lot of companies do criminal background checks, and there's been a movement over the years to be what they call ban the box, which is, hey, don't ask that criminal question on the application because it is maybe cutting out some people before you even meet them, let's say. So
Yes.
there's a movement across several states where they're looking at banning that criminal question on the application, but you can ask it after the hire. But get this, California they've introduced a bill that would ban criminal background checks completely from
Oh, wow.
most. Yeah, but it says for most private employers. And this is, if it's enacted, it's called the Fair Chance Act of 2023. It would allow employers to seek job applicants' convictions histories report only in three circumstances:
I am
federal
listening.
or federal or state law or federal regulation requires the employer to obtain that information. Second is federal or state law may prohibit maybe someone with a particular conviction of holding a
Certain position.
specific position sought, whether the conviction has been expunged, sealed, or dismissed, or whether federal or state law prohibits an applicant from that position being hired. Basically, I guess if you're a teacher, maybe state law might say, hey, you have to have a background check, right?
Yeah, in the
But if
banking
you're going to work
industry.
banking industry, perhaps, but
Yeah.
maybe, hotel workers, theme park workers, food service workers, construction workers, things like that. If there's not a state or federal law that covers that particular job, you're not going to be able to do any type of criminal background check,
Wow.
which, yeah, it is
I don't
interesting.
know. Like I get the purpose of it, but it makes me worried. Let's say I'm running a store, and if I can't do a background check on the people that I'm bringing into my store, what if they have a theft on their background, right? I mean, I'm not gonna eliminate them altogether, but I would give them a chance. I don't know. It depends on the person, but like if I don't know about it, then I don't know.
Well, here's what's going to happen. If we eliminate criminal background checks, or you can still do reference checks. You can still
Right.
do checks where you check length of employment history, call other employers to at least get the employment history, the dates of employment, whether someone has been honest or not. My concern is our topic today
Right.
of workplace
Perfectly fine.
violence.
Right.
The main reason we do these background checks, the main reason, although some people are like, oh, someone's got a theft and now I don't want to hire him for this or this, that. I get that. Okay. But the main is workplace violence. You have someone that has a violent history, a violent criminal history, and there have been companies that have been sued because they've hired someone, they've not done due diligence, they've
Yeah.
not done and then the person commits an act of workplace violence. What happens? The company gets sued by people that say you didn't do a good job of checking someone's background. So it does really muddle the waters, shall we say,
Yeah.
and we'll see what happens.
It goes back to that episode we did. It was in Alabama. It was on the chicken farm where the young lady was run over by the forklift driver, and they had a background check, and he had violence on that background check, right? And so that would eliminate any of that possibility to go, well, we couldn't do that. We wouldn't know, right? And so, wow, lots. That's a good. That's a great. Hadn't seen that one in there. The other thing that I heard, and that this isn't going to come to fruition, I don't think, but the Democrats have put a bill in to raise the exempt minimum salary level and have it based on cost of living. So it's always 55% or something, that kind of stuff. So typically we see that coming out from the Department of Labor. And I think the Democrats are going, we're going to try to put a bill across to do that. The people I've talked to don't think that's going to happen. However, we still need to be paying attention because we do think the Department of Labor is going to do something in that space sometime this year.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to be paying attention to that. But I just think those are things that are so interesting, like what possibly could go on, how that's going to impact companies and how we think about that. How do we do our work day in and day out? So good kind of topics there to kind of, we'll keep an eye, obviously everyone will keep an eye on them. That's why you come to us, because that's what we're doing. We're listening and paying attention to those things and reaching out to people to see what's happening. So.
Sure. So we've got some stories today, or at least one big story today, John. And how do you want to handle it going forward?
Let's see. We should probably take a break. Let's take a break and then we'll come back and we'll do the trigger alert because we need to do a trigger alert for this story, ladies and gentlemen. And then I'll get into my story and then we'll just talk about the subject. The subject today is going to be workplace violence. You're all listening to HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Harassment at work continues to be a major issue. But do you know what to do when one of your employees tells you they have been harassed at work? The team at HR Stories is presenting a half-day workshop called Investigating Harassment Complaints. Registration information is in the show notes, or you can go to hrchecklist.com and register for our newsletter.
All right, folks, welcome back to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. I do want to let you know that the topic we're going to be covering, John and I, is about workplace violence. It's been in the news a lot. There have been some acts of unspeakable violence that has gone on in schools and workplaces. And so we're going to be discussing these violent acts, the use of weapons, and bullying. So if this might upset you or others in the room, please do not listen to the rest of the podcast. And of course, we will catch up with you next week. So John, you are on. Tell us a story.
All right. This is a true story here. It was a hot summer night. Henry pulled his Dodge Dart into the parking lot of the convenience store where he was to begin the overnight shift. The store was bustling with late-night customers getting snacks and filling up on gas. He waved to his second shift coworker as he dropped off his stuff in the back office. He looked at his boss's desk for a shift note to see what he would have to do for the night. For the first 30 minutes, Henry chatted with his coworkers and checked inventory levels, which was his main responsibility on the third shift. He was there to ensure the store was ready for the morning rush. He also had to serve a few customers who stopped by to pick up snacks, coffee, or gas. His coworker left a little before midnight. The crowd settled down, but still kept steady pace about 1:30. This was when Henry's favorite time was. The store was quiet. The few customers who came in usually didn't make too much small talk, and he could just focus on filling the shelves. He felt like it was kind of a little bit zen there. About an hour later, Henry decided to empty the trash cans into the dumpster. The evening shift had been busy, so there was a lot of garbage. He grabbed the 4 bags and headed for the door. The humidity and heat hit him as soon as he stepped outside. Wet sweat started to form under his uniform. He stood there, watching the lone car driving down the highway. He wondered where it was going. Henry walked back to the dumpster, thinking about where he was headed. Soon he would be back at college, finishing up his senior year, and headed off to find a real job. With a fling of his wrist, the trash bags flew into the dumpster, landing with a pleasant thump. He started walking back to the store when he heard a voice behind him. "Don't look back. I have a gun. Is there anybody else in the store?" "No," Henry said, looking over his shoulder. He saw a shadowy figure pointing an object at him. "I said not to turn around. Walk to the store." Henry gulped and headed to the store. He felt the presence behind him. It was a female, slightly smaller than him. She had a pistol. Henry opened the door and instinctively held it open. She pushed him forward with the barrel of the pistol. "What's behind that door?" the robber said, pointing to the pistol toward the office door. "It's the office." It's where we keep the inventory, Henry said, his voice now shaking. Open it! Don't do anything stupid. Henry opened the door. The robber stepped closer and looked inside. As she did, Henry kept thinking, why hasn't this been covered in training? He didn't know what to do. Should I give her the money? Should he try to stop her? Why wasn't this covered in training? Henry thought. Okay. The robber pulled Henry from his thoughts. Open the cash register. I want you to put all the money in the sack. She handed Henry a sack that looked like a kid's pillowcase. Henry opened the cash drawer and put all the money into the sack, including the change. Hoping that the change would slow her down. For what purpose, Henry really didn't know. Any more? The robber asked, pointing the gun towards Henry. This is all I have access to, Henry's voice shook. He was terrified that one word, one bad move, and he would be shot. There's more, she said, pushing the gun into his chest. That's all I have access to. Henry wondered if this is where it ends. What's in here? said the robber, pointing the locked drawer under the cash register. Henry shrugged. Using the end of the pistol, she tried to open it, and as she did, the store erupted with the sound of gun being fired. Henry froze, small pieces of paper floating in the air. Was that a starter pistol, Henry wondered? It's real, she shouted as if to answer Henry's unasked questions. Tell me where the rest of the money is. I told you. That's all I have access to. Knowing that in that locked drawer was the second cash drawer. For a moment, they both just stood. Finally, she broke the silence. Is there a back exit? In the office, but it's trigger alarm, Henry said, his voice no longer shaking. Get in the office. Don't come out for 10 minutes or I'm going to shoot you. And then she was gone. Workplace violence happens every day. According to the statistics, there are 37,520 different incidents of workplace violence in 2022. There are over 100 a day. According to one article I read, assaults resulted in over 20,000 injuries and 392 fatalities in workplaces across the country. Henry's story is about an individual outside the company coming in. Most workplace violence happens from a coworker or customer. The number one industry that is impacted by workplace violence is healthcare workers. According to OSHA, workplace violence can be broken down into 4 different categories. Criminal intent, as we heard in Henry's story. Customer and client, which happens a lot in the healthcare industry. Personal relationships, which bring trouble relationships into the workplace. And finally, worker-on-worker violence, where an employee or past employee attacks or threatens employees or past employees in the workplace.
Wow. Yeah. That. Thank you for breaking that down. I didn't realize OSHA had put it in those categories, but that's good because that will allow companies to focus their training where it needs to be.
Yeah, because every workplace is going to have a different level of risk based on all of those, right? And so I think I've told everyone this. I worked at QVC for a long time. Obviously, we had very visible hosts, right? People that were on air. And there was a lot of times that we would have a stalker alert, right? And so these hosts, a couple of them in particular, had stalkers, and it was terrible. They were terrified. And so we had to have special arrangements for them to get in the building. We had to make sure they were protected outside of work, right? And so those are the kind of things that was a large risk for us, and we had to kind of deal with that. And we also had very strong security in the building, so we had to make sure that people just didn't have access to the building. Basic stuff, but you kind of have to think about that think about in Henry's situation, how do you stop individuals that you need customers to come into your store? So how would you stop people from coming into your store? I know in a lot of cases, those places now have bulletproof glasses and the individual cashiers are in that box, right? And I know in Henry's case that the boss of Henry said to him after this incident happened, do not throw out the trash anymore. Like, do not go out there. Do not go outside. Stay in the building.
That's the first thing I thought of,
right.
is Why is he going outside the store on his own in the dark to throw out the trash?
Yeah.
So there's training there, procedures that can be put in place, simple things.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it was a different time. This was a couple of years ago, and maybe they weren't thinking about it. Maybe they just, I don't know, right? And so those are kind of really important kind of lessons that I think we need to dive into. But I do want to share another story, Chuck, if you do have the time for me to share another story.
Yes, go ahead. I love it.
And this one's a short one. It's not that long, but it starts with this statement. Julie was fired for having a panic attack. That's not where the story starts, though. Julie worked in an office setting, and her coworkers would laugh at her and call her the B word. When she brought this to her manager's attention, they did nothing. So Julie emailed them saying, hey, this is what's going on. I don't feel comfortable. I feel like I'm being harassed. I'm being bullied in the workplace. Instead, one day, the manager shows up at the desk saying that one of her coworkers no longer wants to work in the same department because of her. 2 months later, she was fired for having that panic attack. Now, she had been for that company for almost 30 years. It was 28 years and like 8 months. And think about that long-term employee who now, and this was a recent thing, right? This is that things changed and she had new coworkers. This was a recent thing. So now you're losing all of that institutional knowledge because the manager didn't have the guts to stand up to the bullies in the workplace. And it's kind of sad, right? It's kind of sad in there. So workplace violence is an act, right? So let's get into the definition. Workplace is an act in which a person is abused, threatened, intimidated, or assaulted in their employment. Bullying is considered workplace violence. Mm-hmm. And it is defined as a pattern of behavior that harms, intimidates, undermines, offends, degrades, or humiliates an employee, possibly in front of other employees, clients, or customers.
Yeah, sure. When I teach my respectful workplace, sexual harassment class, all that stuff, sometimes the client will ask about bullying, and I'll say, yeah, I'll put a piece in there about bullying. I say, because a lot of times in most places, bullying is not illegal, but it can be illegal if it involves harassment based on one of the protected classes.
Yeah, right. And so, I mean, again, it's so important for people to understand that, because I think a lot of times, bullying will come out and that kind of stuff. But it's possible that bullying doesn't raise the level of to legality, right? It doesn't raise the level to legality. But then we have to think about culture and ethics and how do we want people to be treated in our workplace. And so there should be a clear no bullying policy in there. So let's do this, Chuck. Let's take a break. Now we can kind of get over those stories a little bit, and then let's come back and we'll start talking about the things we can do to prevent workplace violence in our workplace.
That sounds great. Folks, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, a production of the team at HR Stories. Hello, listeners. I have some questions for you. Do you find yourself struggling with HR and employment issues? Are you afraid you could make the wrong employment decision that will cost your company thousands or even millions of dollars? Maybe you're new to the world of HR, or you've been in HR for a while and you just wish you had one resource, a guide to help you get HR right. Well, I've got good news for you. The team at HR Stories is excited to announce a new comprehensive resource, the Ultimate Book of HR Checklists. We created the Ultimate Book of HR Checklists as a simple, step-by-step resource guide packed with 70 downloadable checklists and other resources that help small businesses and organizations get human resources right. Even with very little HR or management experience, you can get instant results with concise, practical steps for addressing many of your tough employment issues. Do not miss out. Go to hrchecklist.com to learn more. That's hrchecklists with an S.com to learn more. And as always, thanks for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where the lesson is always in the story.
You're listening to John Tallheimer and Chuck Samickian, and today's topic is workplace violence.
Yeah, John, what can we do to prevent workplace violence? And I have to just throw in there,
Yeah.
there's obviously different facets of workplace violence, and it almost seems like to me there's not really one specific answer. So what can we do to mitigate these things?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I don't think there's a singular, like, okay, we're going to do this one thing and it's going to stop workplace violence everywhere. But I think the number one thing we can do is to be proactive, right? We have to be proactive, meaning we have to take that moment, as uncomfortable as it can be, and think about, what are we doing as an organization? What are we doing as a business to protect our employees from workplace violence? And again, workplace violence can be that bullying from coworker to coworker. It could be, like in Henry's story, somebody coming in from the outside with a gun, and anything in between that, right? And so it could be all that. So we have to go through those scenarios and go, what are we doing in there? And so my first thing is to adopt the zero tolerance policy regarding workplace violence, which should include bullying and harassment, and it includes not only the workers, but anyone that interacts with our employees, right? And so that would include customers and clients. One of the things we hear a lot in the restaurant industry, especially in the bars, is that sometimes customers get out of hand, right? And so if you're in an establishment with a bouncer, that's great. The bouncer can come in and kind of do that, but you need to make sure, what's the protocol? What are those things? And so that's the first thing, the zero tolerance policy. And I will say, so when I was doing my research, Chuck, and I don't know what your thoughts on this, and I would love to hear, there was a group of people that said, do not do a zero tolerance policy. And so what their thought was, you have to give executives, you have to give managers a little bit of freedom depending on the work context. So do you have any thoughts on that? What's your thinking?
I've worked at places where if two employees get into a fight, even if the one person was not the instigator, they would either fire both employees or suspend both employees equally. It was this equal across the board. And I never felt right, because a lot of times there was a true instigator, someone that threw the first punch type of thing, but then it sometimes gets muddled. So I think it just depends on the level of the action. I think anything physical altercation definitely would be in the way of a zero tolerance, but that's a tough one. I can't say I see that written into policies now. I've been looking at some workplace violence policies. I've not seen where they say zero tolerance for workplace violence.
Yeah, and so when I went to the OSHA site, and OSHA has a lot of great information. They have a lot of workplace, and then the National Institute of Occupation Safety and Health has a whole thing on it, lots of training on there, and they did recommend a zero tolerance policy. But I think it has to be, this is what the zero tolerance is. And
there you go. Define it out.
Be very clear about, okay, this is what it is. But again, create some kind of policy around workplace violence. It needs to be in there. The other thing that you really need to do is train your staff, yourself and your staff, to know the warning signs of potential workplace violence, right? Is there a change in behavior? Is there a history of violence? Is there threatening behavior, intimidating behavior, increase in personal stress, a marked change in mood or behavior, and finally, social isolation? Meaning not that person that comes in and just kind of hangs out with themselves all the time, but that individual that was hanging out with everybody and now is socially isolating. There's probably something going on, right? There's something going on, and kind of paying attention to that, and then taking action. And that action could just be a coaching conversation. Hey, what's going on? Are you all right? We noticed that your stress levels are getting a little bit higher. Is there anything we can do? If you have an employee assistant program, that's a great opportunity to send people to the, hey, do you know we have this? This is a great opportunity. You may want to use the counselors. They have a lot of stress reduction things in there. So I would recommend, I always recommend all my clients get an employee assistant program. So having that in there as well. The next step is you need to have some kind of anonymous reporting system. And so there needs to be a way for people to let you know, hey, these things are going on. So whether that goes to HR, goes to your leadership team, there needs to be there. So a particular coworker customer can say, hey, this is concern without being retaliated against. And then the key here is the follow-up, right? And so again, just getting the information is not good enough. You have to follow it. One of the things that I would recommend, and I think, Chuck, your safety brand of your consulting company does these, but do a risk analysis in the workplace.
Yeah.
Just walk through the workplace. If somebody wanted to do harm, how easy it is to access to your building. I have been into so many companies where they leave the back door open.
Yeah.
Every employee knows the back door is open, right? And all of a sudden it takes, you have an angry employee. And I think that goes to your story. I don't know if you want to share it now, but I think it goes to your story. If you don't want to share it, that's fine. But
I want to share it. Let me get through your points, because these are great. These are fascinating.
Okay. And then do you have a certain security system in place? Do you have a way to communicate to all your employees, right? Because if there is a situation, how do you communicate out to all of your employees? And when I was at one of my classes, I think it was one of my classes, we were talking about workplace violence, and they were telling me that they had a receptionist, and then behind the receptionist was a locked door. So you couldn't get into the room. And if there was a situation, she would get on the phone and do an announcement that Dr. Brown had just arrived. And everyone knew that there was a situation that needed to be dealt with in the lobby, right? And so again, having their safe drop for boxes for valuables. Do you have sufficient staffing on all shifts? So in Henry's case, he was the only person working on an overnight shift. Is that the right thing for your business? Yeah, that's great for your return on investment, but is that the right thing for safety and that kind of stuff? Practice your response to workplace violence situations. I know this is not comfortable, but from bullying between coworkers to an active shooters drill, what are you going to do? You got to practice it, because you've got to be there. Okay, so I wasn't going to go there, but we did have a shooting here in Nashville a couple weeks ago. Right. And what made that a lot better than it could have been, was the staff was prepared. And they don't talk about this in the big news, but one of the teachers stood out front, had the keys, and told them exactly what was happening.
Yeah.
And so they had gone through, like, hey, this is what you do. Right. And if they hadn't had that, a lot of things would have gone worse, right? So sorry.
It's a crazy story with that, because they interviewed on TV the guy that did the active shooter training. And he said they did exactly what I taught them. He says, it's very hard for me because I remember some of those teachers. He says, but he said they did exactly what I told them to do. It saved lives. And if you think you're beyond doing an active shooter training, or you're afraid to do one because, oh my gosh, it might give someone an idea to do, I don't know. But I have to tell you, that saved lives in that case. And doing an active shooter type of training, and a lot of the things you're talking about, the risk analysis and things like that, will help save lives.
Yeah. And again, active shooter drills were the big one, right? That's the big, like, okay, we can do that. But I also think, how do you deal with bullying? Have you role played those conversations so you're prepared as the HR professional, the small business owner, to know what you're going to say, right? And so, because you're going to have to address them. They're not going to be comfortable conversations. You're going to tell somebody, like, your behavior is wrong, and we're going to let you go because of this. And so practicing role playing, maybe that comes from my theater background. I don't know, but I know that it's so important to feel more comfortable if we're going to have those conversations, right? And then the last thing I will say is to hire that out. If you're not comfortable, you can't feel like you're going to do it, hire the outside expert to assess your risk for workplace violence. and to provide training to your team. So you are prepared in any of those cases. Like Henry didn't have any training. He didn't know what to do. When I talked to him afterwards, had that conversation, he said, "Oh, my boss came in, right? He called his boss and the police came and all that kind of stuff. His boss is like, you did the right thing. Give him the money. Just let them. Your life is way more important." Well, wouldn't that have been nice to know before this situation happened?
Right.
Right. And so again, building that training into that system, I think, is critical to do that.
Yeah.
So I want to hear your story because I think it ties into all this.
Sure.
And we can kind of start talking about what went wrong in that case, that story.
Sure. I've got a couple of stories. Story number one basically feeds into what you said is you got to do the risk assessment. I've done plenty of those with a partner of mine, Rob Honahan, who's a safety and risk consultant. And first thing he'll do is go in any restaurant, any facility, he'll go look at the back door. And it's open. They're like, well, we don't want anyone to get locked out when they go to the dumpster. I mean, it's like the craziest stories. And then they'll come in that way. And then the people's purses are there. People's backs are to them. So you've got to keep that in mind. But two stories come to mind, John. The first one is here in Orlando last year, we had a lady that worked at an apartment complex. And it was a sexual harassment story that turned into a workplace violence story. She worked at an apartment complex. One day she goes missing. And they go into her apartment. It's all in disarray. There was a struggle. Something happened. Well, the first thing everyone says is, get the maintenance guy. We got to talk to him. Ask the maintenance guy. Why ask him? Well, because he was always asking her out, giving her flowers. She didn't want anything to do with him. And it was kind of a harassment situation, but ultimately the management leadership team did nothing to stop it. They didn't talk to him to say, stop doing this. They didn't discipline him. They didn't listen to her. Ultimately, she loses her life over this. And so the whole story is, had they seen the signs, had they taken action, this may not have happened. So that's the first story. The other story I have is remembering to look for those signs. So last year there was a Walmart shooting, and I know it's like, oh, was it in Texas? Was there? This one was in Chesapeake, Virginia, killed 6 people. And there's an employee for Walmart that is suing Walmart, a survivor, because she says that the manager, this was a manager, by the way, that brought a gun to work and started shooting the employees in the break room. She says this guy, his name was Andre Bing. He was a jerk. He was a bullier. He threatened people. He harassed them. He acted inappropriately, bizarrely, and dangerously. And he had a long pattern display of unsettling behaviors, and he was known for being a mean and cruel supervisor. And they're saying Walmart should have known that this guy was just ready to just, he was going to be a problem. And it ended up, so those are the two stories I have with that.
Yeah, and you think about that Walmart story, because as I remember, he was like a second shift manager. I don't know if that's for sure, but I think he was second. So he wasn't the overall, the general manager of the store, right? And so you would think that the general manager would be aware of that and wouldn't allow that, right? And so what makes, and again, I don't know, obviously we don't know all the details, but what allows somebody in their mind to go, that person is acceptable in the workplace? And I'm sure now, right, it's easy to see, a lot of times it's easier to see the signs looking back. And so, but I do think, again, we don't need to jump on every single person and go, oh, just because they're different, they're going to be workplace violent. But we do need to be paying attention and, again, get our gut. And if we're feeling uncomfortable, have somebody come in and do investigation, talk to the employees, see what's going on. And then making a risk assessment. Is this a risk? Is this not a risk? And a lot of times, and I talk about this in my classes, when you think about workplace violence, I will tell you, when I think about workplace violence, I am thinking typically of a white male between the ages of about 22 and 35. But that's not what the statistics say, right? The statistics say that workplace violence can come from any race, any age group, any gender. And so you have to pay attention and just make sure that, to me, the other thing that I would say proactively that we need to do is hire the right people, right? And make sure that who we're bringing into our workplace we feel comfortable with. Now, things happen to people, so people change, but kind of important there. And so here's my final thoughts for today, Chuck. Although the big headlines grab our attention, it's the daily acts of bullying, intimidation, and coercing that impact our organizations. We have to teach our employees to be kind to one another. I know that seems weird, but we do, and create a culture of kindness so that our workplace violence and bullying has no place in our business. And so I really think that's important to kind of do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. In this Walmart story, I just wanted to throw this out there. He did say he had a kill list. He had been disciplined several times for acting bizarrely and strangely and cruelly. So the signs were all there for this person, as many times they are. What happens. Yeah. Folks, thanks for listening to the HR Stories podcast. I hope you got something out of this episode today that you will take with you. Maybe it'll be something that will prompt you to action as a leader in your organization that can perhaps change a policy, perhaps implement a program, perhaps you can refer this episode to someone else, save lives, save heartache. And well, we do this because we love providing information to you, and we hope that you can take it forward and make use of it.
Yeah, and if you love what we're doing on our podcast, please give us a 5-star review. That gets us up in the ratings, right? Gets us up, allows us to reach more people. That's, again, if getting into all the details of it, but the more 5-star ratings we are, the higher the podcast providers will push us up. And we're happy. We're up there. We were ranked as the 11th best HR podcast, but we want to be number one, right? We want to be number one. And so because we want to reach as many people as possible, right? And so let's do that. Let's make sure we do that. Hey, Chuck, any hints about the topic for next week?
No, you know what, John? I think I have some ideas, but let's keep our listeners on edge because it will be a very timely topic that will be in the news.
You've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.
Nice job today, John.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.